Don't act high and mighty. You're useless.
When I scolded David for causing trouble with his classmates, he glared at me and spat those words. It wasn't the first time this had happened. David often looked down on me, mocking me for being a high school graduate. Since his father, Ryan, was a brilliant surgeon, David firmly believed he himself was exceptional too. Indeed, David was academically gifted, but the trouble he caused this time was rooted in his arrogance. Then I'll call your real mother. I said this, pulling out my phone as David continued to rebel.
What?
David stared at me, his face twisted in disbelief. It was obvious that no one else in the room, just like David, could process what I had just said. Ignoring the tense atmosphere, I began tapping on my phone. When David learns the truth about his birth and what lies ahead, I wonder if he'll be able to handle it. My name is Katherine Johnson. I'm a 38-year-old homemaker. Currently, I live with my husband, Ryan, and our son, David. The fact that I can stay at home is all thanks to Ryan. Ryan is an exceptional surgeon and provides for our family single-handedly. His clinic, located a little outside our home in Chicago, is well regarded and attracts patients not only from the city, but also from neighboring areas. I still think Ryan is too good a husband for me. We met about 20 years ago. Why did he fall for someone like me, who was surrounded by such a negative aura back then? My life took a drastic turn during my senior year of high school. It was the summer of my last year in high school when I suddenly became a mother. At the time, I lived with my father and my older sister, Sarah. Sarah, 3 years older than me, was in college. After our parents divorced when we were little, my father raised us. He was a strict and old-fashioned man, which made both Sarah and me a bit uneasy around him. The incident happened the year Sarah entered college. One morning, Sarah suddenly disappeared. She left behind a newborn baby. When I woke up as usual, I found my father, who should have been at work, sitting in the living room. "Dad, don't you have work today?" I asked cautiously, noticing he was sitting with his back to me. He slowly turned to face me, an emotion that felt like something out of a horror movie. Even before I could see his face, I noticed what he was holding. It was a baby. "Dad, whose baby is that?" I froze, staring at the newborn cradled awkwardly in his arms. Instead of responding, he nodded toward a note on the table. I rushed over to read it.
"I'm sorry. Please take care of this baby. He's mine."
The hurried handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's. And at the end of the note, she had signed it along with the name David. Even as a teenager, I understood everything from that single piece of paper. Sarah, still a college student, had a child, gave birth to him, and she abandoned him to run away. She must have judged that she couldn't turn to her strict father for help. After discovering her pregnancy, she likely kept it to herself until the end. Neither my father nor I had any idea that Sarah was pregnant. It's true that Sarah's college schedule was different from ours. Still, the fact that we, as her family, noticed nothing unusual is something I deeply regret. My father contacted the police to search for Sarah. However, her whereabouts remained a mystery. While abandoning her own child was unforgivable, the baby was healthy and in good condition. The police didn't take the matter seriously, and bluntly told us that the care of the baby was now our responsibility. My father agonized over the situation for a long time before finally deciding what to do.
This child will be placed in foster care. We can't take care of him anymore.
I believe his decision was the right one. Raising a baby in our circumstances would have been reckless, but I opposed my father's judgment. Even now, I don't know why I said what I did at the time. I'm disappointed in you. Dad, I can't believe you do this. This is Sarah's baby. She already abandoned him, and now we're going to abandon him too. Looking back, my words were immature and completely naive. I brushed past my father's attempts to stop me, grabbed the baby, and ran out of the house. At the time, I was convinced I was the only one who could protect Sarah's abandoned baby. After that, with the help of social services, I somehow managed to start my new life. Of course, I had no choice but to drop out of university, leaving me with the label of a high school graduate. Since I was still a minor, city officials acted as intermediaries, keeping my father informed about my life and circumstances. Despite what I had said, my father worked harder than ever to support my life. Every time I received money from him, I reflected on my words and actions and often cried. Though I had been too stubborn to say it outright, I truly wanted to return to his house. Just when I was beginning to seriously consider going back, tragedy struck. My father passed away suddenly. It was a car accident. He had likely been exhausted, and his car crashed into a guardrail, taking his life. I resented Sarah. It was only natural for me to blame her for everything that had happened. Although I had taken responsibility for David, I lamented my misfortune and eventually fell into despair. By the time a year had passed since my father's death, I was completely broken emotionally. I couldn't work and relied solely on the money my father had left behind. What would happen to David and me in the future? I cursed my past self from the depths of my heart. Why did I decide to take David in? Why didn't I simply listen to my father? Days of questioning myself over and over passed. One day, amidst that monotony, a minor accident occurred to me. In my cluttered home, I tripped over a bottle on the floor and fell hard. The fall was bad, splitting my forehead open. The pain was excruciating, and my poor health made it nearly impossible to stand. I was taken to the hospital, which was Johnson Surgery, where Ryan served as the chief surgeon. Ryan expertly treated my forehead wound, ensuring it left no scar. While I was at the hospital, Ryan and the staff even took care of David, who I had no choice but to bring along. And for the first time in ages, I was able to get some rest. The next morning, Ryan smiled kindly and asked me to tell him what had happened. Seeing his gentle expression, I opened up about everything I had been carrying alone. Ryan listened to my story earnestly, no matter how long it took. Even after my treatment ended and I was discharged, Ryan kept checking in on me. He was concerned about my health, my life, and David's well-being. At the time, I hadn't been wearing makeup. My hair was a mess, and I was so unkempt that I barely bathed more than once every few weeks. I believed there was no way someone like Ryan could feel romantic feelings for me, and I simply took his kindness as the compassion of a doctor. Later, I learned that Ryan had developed feelings for me as we talked and got to know each other. At first, he told me he reached out mainly because he was worried about David's health. But over time, he realized he had grown fond of me. Thanks to Ryan, I regained both my physical and mental health and was eventually able to work again. And in time, I too developed feelings for Ryan. But with a 10-year age gap and me being a single mother, I believed we were far from being a good match. I was aware of my feelings but kept them hidden. This went on for a few years, during which I managed to get back on my feet.
You've built a life for yourself on your own. Sure, our incomes and jobs are different, but both of us are individuals contributing to society.
One day, Ryan said this to me. I didn't fully understand where he was going with it, but I nodded along.
Catherine, will you marry me?
His sudden proposal left me speechless, but Ryan continued. He went on at length, some of it hard for me to follow, but his message was clear. We stood on equal footing as individuals, and he wanted me to marry him, not out of obligation, but as a partner. He assured me he hadn't forgotten about David, and his proposal was made with that in mind. Naturally, I accepted, and Ryan and I started our life together as a family. For the past 20 years, Ryan has continued to love me unconditionally. This alone would make for a happy life, but I'm currently facing a major challenge. That is, my relationship with David. After much discussion, Ryan and I decided not to tell David the truth about his origins. We chose to act as though we were his biological parents. A typical child would never suspect that their parents might not be their real parents. As we had hoped, David never questioned his birth. Having grown up watching Ryan work as a surgeon, David developed a deep admiration for the profession. As a child, his dream was pure and innocent, and Ryan and I found it endearing. We wholeheartedly supported his aspirations. However, as time passed, David's feelings began to change. He became obsessed with the idea of being a doctor and overly confident in himself as the son of a skilled surgeon. Confidence can be a good thing, but it comes in many forms. The confidence David possessed was warped and ugly. It couldn't stay hidden and began manifesting in his behavior. At times, he would mock and belittle his classmates. Other times, he looked down on the nurses and doctors working at Ryan's clinic. No matter how confident or intelligent a child might be, their knowledge and judgment are still immature. He couldn't possibly compare to the professionals actually working in the field. But David, being a child, didn't understand that. When Ryan discovered David's behavior and remarks, he scolded him severely for the first time. If you can't understand people's feelings, you have no right to be a doctor. David, who deeply admired and idolized his father, was profoundly shaken by this. While he appeared to change his ways under Ryan's watchful eye, he continued his arrogant behavior out of Ryan's sight. Perhaps realizing that I didn't want to trouble Ryan with his behavior, David began targeting me instead with insults and disrespect. After all, I had been the one who brought David into Ryan's life. I didn't want to disappoint Ryan or make him regret taking us in. So I endured David's verbal attacks.
You didn't even graduate from college, so don't lecture me like that.
David remembered an offhand comment I had made in the past and used it to silence me whenever it suited him. He wanted to assert his superiority and shut me down. At first, I tried to address his behavior, but my desire to maintain harmony with Ryan led me to tolerate David's actions. I realize now that my own actions and parenting were part of the problem. Even though I raised David as my own, I had spoiled him excessively, likely because of his origins. I saw parts of myself in David, abandoned by his biological parents, and in comforting him, I had also been trying to comfort myself. After marrying Ryan and having him join in raising David, those parenting mistakes stopped. However, I believe David still remembers my behavior from those times deep down. Given this history, revealing David's abusive behavior to Ryan would also expose my own foolish actions to him. I had no doubt about that. The thought of being disliked by the man I love, Ryan, was more painful to me than anything. In that sense, I harbored my own distorted feelings, much like David.
You're able to be a stay-at-home mom thanks to Dad, so you should respect me too as his son. When you get old, I'll take care of you. Sound good, huh?
As David grew older, his words became sharper, and I realized that he insulted and demeaned me to satisfy his own ego. He saw me as a foolish mother who couldn't fight back, and he continued to hurl verbal abuse at me whenever something upset him. By the time David was a senior in high school and about to take his college entrance, he was attending the top-ranked high school in the state and was one of the best performing students there. His dream school was, of course, a prestigious medical university, and his teachers and tutors had no doubt he would get in. But one day, an incident occurred that dragged both Ryan and me into the chaos. David got into a fight with a classmate? Did he hurt the other boy? The sudden call from the school sent me into a panic. I had always feared something like this might happen one day. By tolerating David's behavior, I had enabled him to hurt someone else. Sweat drenched my hands as I clutched the phone, and my mouth went completely dry.
No, that's not the case. Actually, David was the one who got hit. He isn't seriously injured, but now that we're aware of this incident, we can't just let it go unnoticed.
As the school explained that they were still confirming the facts with the other party, I felt my strength drain from my body, and I sank to the floor in relief. While I didn't know all the details, it seemed David was the victim this time. The other students' parents had offered to come to the school to apologize, and so I decided to head there myself. On my way, I felt relieved to know David was the victim. It was a terrible thought for a parent to have, especially when my child had been hit and injured. When I arrived at the school, the teacher guided me to the principal's office. Inside, I saw the principal and David sitting together, facing another student and a woman who appeared to be his parent. As soon as I entered the room, the woman burst into repeated apologies, tears welling in her eyes.
I'm so sorry for what my son has done. I can't express how deeply sorry I am.
I tried to calm her down and asked if we could hear the details of what had happened. As things stood, I knew nothing about the reason or the events leading to the fight.
There was a little verbal spat, sure, but I didn't throw any punches. This guy suddenly hit me out of nowhere.
David raised his voice, directing his explanation at me. His attitude made me instantly suspect there was more to the story. Looking over at the other student, I saw him staring at the floor, trembling with his frustration. I understand David got hit, but is there something else you're not telling us? Ma'am, please don't hold back. I gently urged the other mother, and tears filled her eyes again as she began to speak.
There's no excuse for my son's reaction or using physical force, but David kept saying cruel things, using his father as a weapon to threaten my son.
Her voice trailed off as she collapsed next to her son, clearly overwhelmed.
That's a lie. I didn't do anything like that.
David, visibly shaken, shouted, but I shot him a sharp glare and reprimanded him firmly. I'm not talking to you right now. When I prompted further, the other student finally explained why he had hit David. It turned out that his younger sister was a patient of Ryan, battling a serious illness. David had used this knowledge to threaten him, claiming that if he didn't obey, Ryan would stop treating his sister. Given David's reputation as the surgeon's son, it wasn't hard to see why the boy had believed the lie. For years, he had endured David's demands, behaving like his lackey for the sake of his sister. While David hadn't taken money from him, he had forced him into other degrading situations, which had built up over time. Eventually, the boy's pent-up frustration exploded, leading to this incident. After learning the full story, I immediately contacted Ryan, urging him to come to the school as quickly as possible. I explained the situation to him briefly, and Ryan rushed into school.
I deeply apologize for my son's appalling behavior. It goes without saying that everything he said was a lie. Regardless of the circumstances, I will personally ensure that your daughter's treatment continues without interruption.
Ryan said this, tears streaming down his face as he bowed in apology. In that moment, I felt a renewed sense of gratitude for Ryan, who had always been sincere in his relationship with David. Despite having no biological connection to David, Ryan shed tears and humbly offered his apologies. After casting a glance at David, Ryan continued,
That being said, the sins my son has committed won't disappear. I understand that trusting me again will be difficult. As a gesture of accountability, my wife and I will sever ties with our son. Please, let me continue treating your daughter.
Ryan's calm and resolute words sounded almost surreal to me, as if I were hearing someone else's story. They felt so disconnected from reality that I couldn't fully comprehend them at first. Ryan? A few seconds later, panic began to ripple through everyone in the room except Ryan.
This can't be. Dr. Johnson, you've already apologized and promised to continue treating my daughter. My son is at fault too. Please, calm down.
The parent pleaded, her voice trembling. Even her son looked distressed by Ryan's declaration. The principal and teacher, who had been watching the exchange with growing concern, could no longer remain silent.
Mr. Johnson, please reconsider. David is still a minor, and if he reflects on his actions, there's a chance for him to change.
They desperately tried to calm Ryan down, assuring him that David could turn things around.
I appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter. Catherine, my mind is made up. What is your opinion?
When I met Ryan's determined gaze, I realized there was no changing his decision. No one could sway him now.
Dad, what are you talking about? You're joking, right? I'll change. I promise I'll never do anything like this again.
David, sensing the gravity of Ryan's resolve, looked on the verge of tears as he pleaded. Watching him, a flood of memories overwhelmed me. But even so, this incident couldn't be forgiven. It was time for David to take responsibility for his actions and atone for them. This decision would ultimately be for David's own good. I understand. I agree with you. David, do you now understand that every action has consequences? How dare you tarnish your father's name? Have some shame. When I said this, David's face twisted with visible anger as he shouted at me.
Don't act high and mighty. You're useless.
It was a feeble act of defiance, a last-ditch attempt to appear strong. Though his words were laced with mockery, it was clear David was falling apart. Then I'll call your real mother.
What?
Ignoring David's reaction, I asked everyone present to bear with me for a little longer. Once they agreed, I took out my phone and made a call. A few minutes later, my sister Sarah arrived.
Ryan, it's been a long time.
Sarah said, bowing deeply to him and then to everyone else in the room. David, she's your biological mother. She abandoned you shortly after you were born. I am your aunt, but I have no connection to your father. And your real father is not Ryan. As I spoke, David collapsed to the floor.
That's a lie. This can't be true. If you want to punish me, at least come up with a better lie.
Despite his outburst, it was clear he didn't believe it was a joke. The moment he saw Sarah, he instinctively recognized her as his biological mother. And so, David learned the truth about his origins. For someone who had fully believed he was the son of a brilliant doctor, this revelation was clearly too much to accept.
You, just like me, you've betrayed these people. You truly are my child, without a doubt.
Sarah sobbed, breaking down in tears on the spot. Although we had anticipated the chaos that would follow, both Ryan and I felt an overwhelming guilt for dragging others into this situation.
We apologize for the trouble caused. From now on, David will no longer be under our care. He will return to his biological father.
Ryan declared this to everyone in the room before leaving with me, Sarah, and David. David, who had always exuded confidence and looked down on those around him, had his arrogance shattered in front of his peers. If David had worked hard without arrogance, he could have continued pursuing his dreams. But for David, that was an impossible task. As we silently made our way home, Sarah finally broke the silence.
I've caused you so much trouble. After leaning on Ryan and Catherine, this is the result.
Sarah muttered, her shoulders slumping. Ryan also began to speak, his tone somber.
Sarah had you when she was still a student. Out of fear and family circumstances, she left you at Catherine's family home and disappeared. Since then, Catherine has acted as your mother, and I have done the same.
Even as Ryan spoke, Sarah couldn't stop crying. I truly raised you as my son. Ryan did too. But you've betrayed our love. David, who had been defiant earlier, could now only nod silently at my words.
But Sarah cannot take you in. Even after you've atoned for your actions, restrictions will remain. You have no choice but to go to your biological father. This is something Sarah decided long ago.
Sarah had reappeared in Ryan's and my life 10 years earlier. After abandoning David, she had sought refuge with David's father, John, but eventually turned herself in, overwhelmed by guilt. By the time I learned of Sarah's whereabouts, my father had already passed away, and I was the only one aware of her situation. John, unaware of the circumstances, wasn't arrested but felt too guilty to take David back after all that had happened. When Sarah was released a few years later, I was already married to Ryan and had started a family. Sarah and John met with Ryan, and after many hours of tears, they asked him to continue caring for David. I accepted their apologies and reaffirmed my commitment to raising David as my son. However, both Sarah and John made one firm request.
If this child ever betrays your trust, please don't hesitate to contact us. While I cannot take him in, John will take full responsibility and care for him.
This was their way of making amends. A way to ease the burden on Ryan and me if David ever became unmanageable. Since then, I had kept David's behavior hidden from both Sarah and John, but David had deeply disappointed Ryan. There was no doubt that Ryan's decision to let David go was an agonizing one for him as well. We explained all this to David and made it clear that there was no turning back. And so, David was sent to live with his biological father, John. John's family had been fishermen for generations, and he was no exception. When Sarah contacted him, John didn't hesitate to take David in. John, unmarried and without children, had lived a life of hard work, atoning for his past sins.
Dad, no, I'm your son, right? I'm supposed to be the child of a doctor, not a fisherman.
Even as John arrived to take him, David sobbed and screamed. Without reacting to David's words, Ryan told John,
I failed to take full responsibility for raising him, but this was the agreement we made. If he betrayed our trust, he would return to you.
John took Ryan's words quietly. To both Sarah and John, Ryan was almost a godlike figure. They also expressed their gratitude to me for raising David, even though I was related to him by blood. But Ryan's actions were on another level entirely. Knowing that John had no heir, Ryan must have anticipated that the day might come when David would leave our care. Your real father has been a fisherman since graduating high school. You'll soon learn just how remarkable a man with the same level of education as me, someone you called useless, can be. I whispered softly into David's ear as he cried uncontrollably. It was my revenge for David trampling on Ryan's kindness and betraying my trust. Hearing this, David wailed even louder. Without a word, John grabbed David by the shoulder and forced him into his old pickup truck. What could David have been feeling, sitting in the seat steeped in the smell of the sea? Even as the engine roared to life, David's cries echoed, fading only when the truck disappeared from view. It goes without saying that David's dream of becoming a doctor was crushed. Word of David's true parentage spread quickly through his high school, and it wasn't long before everyone knew he would be taking over his father's fishing business. For someone who had openly declared that anyone not pursuing medicine was beneath him, this was the ultimate humiliation. Eventually, unable to endure the stares and ridicule, David dropped out of university, earning the same high school graduate label he had once used to insult me. David's biological father, John, was a stern and reserved man who thoroughly corrected David's spoiled nature. David must now truly understand the difficulty, hardship, and physical toll of the labor he once mocked. Day after day, he heads out to fish, often in tears, enduring John's strict guidance. At the fishing cooperative, younger peers laugh at his inexperience as a fisherman. After a lifetime of belittling others and betraying trust, David is now facing the consequences of his actions. The outcome is harsh and overwhelming, but David cannot escape this reality. Having relied entirely on Ryan and me, David is incapable of living independently. I'm certain of this. Even if he learns how to live on his own, I doubt his heart will ever recover. Abandoned by Ryan and ridiculed throughout his school, David suffered a mental breakdown. From my perspective, this is his just desserts. It's the path for someone who could make light of a friend's sister's life. Of course, John is taking David to therapy while living with him. Though it must be a significant burden for John, this is the cross they must bear as father and son. Since David left, I'll admit I felt an immense sense of relief. It's not that I found him a nuisance, but deep down, I had always carried the weight of knowing he wasn't truly my child. While Ryan hasn't said it outright, he's shown me more love and affection than ever before. I'm sure he, like me, harbored complicated feelings about the situation. Ryan never voiced complaints and always followed my lead. Now that things have turned out this way, I want to express my deepest gratitude for all he's done. Recently, Ryan and I received some wonderful news. A new life is growing inside me. This child is unmistakably ours, Ryan's and mine. Because of David, Ryan had once vowed not to have children of his own. But now that David has left, we decided together to fulfill that wish. And almost immediately, our wish came true, and I became pregnant. I can fully understand how much this means to Ryan. It has also reaffirmed for me how deeply Ryan loves me. Since getting married, we've faced many challenges, but we worked together to raise David. Even Sarah and John told us that David's fate is his own responsibility and that we bear no blame for it. They encouraged us to live our lives confidently from here on out. Their words lifted a weight off our shoulders, and we were able to start anew. With Ryan by my side, I know we can build our happy family. Watching Ryan now, more motivated than ever as he cares for his patients, only strengthens that belief. There was a time when I wallowed in my misfortune and spread negativity around me, but now I can say from the bottom of my heart that I am truly happy. Looking back on everything we've been through, I can confidently say that I'm glad I was born as me. And for our unborn child, I can't help but wish for a wonderful life filled with as much joy as mine has now become.